Let's go over a few tips and tricks to make sure that Photoshop is set up in a way that will allow you to work as fast as possible. Everybody likes Photoshop to be configured a little bit differently, so I'm going to show you how I like to have it set up. But obviously feel free to experiment with finding the best way that works for you. And if you already took my Photoshop Fundamentals course, this will be a little bit of review, but I am throwing in some new things that pertain specifically to this class. Again, to make sure that you can work as quickly and efficiently as possible. So let's jump into it. So here we are in Photoshop. This is the general layout of the workspace that I really like. I have adjustments and properties here at the top, and I like to keep history states here in the middle. I find it's really convenient there. And one thing you want to do is click the little icon there and go to History Options, and make sure that Make Layer Visibility Changes Undoable is not checked. That's not something that we need to be able to undo. And then click OK. And then here down at the bottom, we have Layers, Channels, and Paths that lives in its own space. And then on the little mini menu here, I like to keep swatches at the top. And then beneath that is the info panel. And then the navigator and the histogram. I think those are there by default in 2020. And then the brushes is really nice to have here. And we're going to go ahead and set up a custom brush in a second. And then clone stamp. And then I like to have actions down here at the bottom. And we'll get to that in a while as well. And just in case it's not clear, up here at the top under Window is where you access all of those tool panels, and then you just drag and drop them wherever you want in the workspace. So this is the layout that I prefer. And then let's customize the toolbar over here. I think a lot of people actually don't realize that you can do that. So if you go here to the top and click Edit, down near the bottom you see Toolbar. And I'm going to go ahead and restore the defaults so we can start from scratch. So this is convenient because as you're using the keyboard shortcuts, each of the tools in the toolbar has its own letter keyboard shortcut, and you can press Shift and then press that letter again, and it cycles through all of the different tools within each category. But there are quite a few tools in some of the categories that we don't really use. So as you're pressing Shift and clicking through the different letters, it's kind of annoying to have to jump past all of the tools that you don't want to get to the ones that you do. So by going in here, you can actually just take the ones that you don't want out of there, and that way you can quickly switch back and forth. It's a real time saver. So the ones that I don't really use are Magnetic Lasso, and you can just click it and drag it over here into this Extra Tools box. And then scroll down a little more. And the Content Aware Move tool I don't use. The Red Eye tool I don't use. The Pencil tool I don't use. Color Replacement tool I don't use. And then these blur tools, blur, sharpen, and smudge, they're very convenient tools for use in masking, and I'll show you some ways to use them. But you see they don't have their own shortcut here, so I like to put them on the letter N. Doesn't really make much sense, the letter N, but it's one of the few letter keys on the keyboard that isn't already pre-assigned to something. So I find that N works pretty well for me there, but obviously feel free to experiment as with everything else. And then the rest of these we can leave as is. And then what makes it convenient is over here in the tools that you moved over here, you want to just go through and delete the keyboard shortcuts for each of those. And now they won't show up when you try to use those shortcuts anymore. And then just click Done. And if you find that at some point you do want to use one of those tools, they've all just moved down here into this little Extra Tools panel here. So we haven't really deleted them, we've just moved them into a place where they're not going to be in our way quite as much. And then we'll set up a couple of custom keyboard shortcuts. So we can go to the top and go to Edit, and then go to Keyboard Shortcuts. And the first one we want to do has to do with layers. So we want to find where it says Layers and click the little drop down. And then scroll down to where it says New Adjustment Layer. And the one that we want to add here is Curves. And here I've already added it. The keyboard shortcut that I like to use is Shift, Command, or Control, and the M key. The reason that I put this particular one on its own keyboard shortcut is because I create a ton of curves as I'm working. I use curves for a lot of things. So having that on the keyboard really speeds up my workflow quite a lot. And that keyboard shortcut is already in use for, I think, like some image analysis tool or something that you'll probably never use. And if you do need it, it's still in the menu. So for me, Shift, Command, or Control M really makes sense because Command M is the shortcut for the other way to use curves. So this one is logical to me, but you do you. And then we want to scroll down a little bit more, down near the bottom, I think. And this one, hide layers. The default for this is Command or Control and the comma key. I personally like to have it on L because L for layers makes more sense to me. But Command L is the default shortcut for levels. But the way that shortcut works with levels, I don't really use. So I prefer to steal that shortcut from levels and use it for layers because that's one that I'm using sometimes hundreds of times per image. So that is easy for me to remember. But if you prefer to just use the default Command comma, go ahead. And then we can click OK out of this little window. And then let's set up a custom brush really quick. This will be the brush that we use for most of our dodging and burning. And I pretty much use it for everything, to be honest. And I find that these particular settings work really well. So we can start by clicking on where it says Soft Round Opacity. And then we want to click over to Brush Settings and change the spacing to 18%. And then go here on the side where it says Shape Dynamics. And under Size Jitter, change the control to Pen Pressure and set the minimum diameter to 50%. And then we can click the little plus icon here to save that brush preset. And that way we can recall it later if we switch to a different brush. And I'm just going to name it AD, my initials, and then click OK. And these settings are assuming that you're using a Wacom tablet, which, you don't have to have a tablet. As I said in the introduction, it will make life a lot easier. But if you're not using one, that's totally fine. Experiment with these settings anyways, but you might find that one of the other standard brushes works better. And then we're done with that. And then we just need to go in and change one thing for the Wacom tablet to make it super convenient. So we want to go to System Preferences and then Wacom Tablet. And the only thing that we want to do here has to do with the clicking function of the pen itself. So I like to disable the top button of the pen buttons. And then on the bottom button, we want to set that to keystroke. And we want to set the keystroke to the X key. And the X key in Photoshop switches the foreground and background colors. So when we're dodging and burning, we can easily switch between the dodge and the burn colors just by clicking the button on the stylus. And that'll make you so much faster because you just kind of have to squeeze your thumb a little bit in order to switch the colors back and forth. That's a really big time saver. And then click OK. And then we can get out of there. And then the last thing that we'll do has to do with history states. So if we go to Photoshop and Preferences, General, and then come down here to Performance, I like to set my history states to 150. Especially when you're a bit newer with retouching, the more history states that you have, the more actions you can undo. So Photoshop will keep a longer record of everything that you're doing. And that way, if you make a mistake or you want to use a history brush for something, you can go further back in time. It will use a little bit more of your system resources. So if you find that your computer is running a bit slowly, you might want to play with that number a little bit. But I find that 150 works quite well. And it's enough states that you're less likely to realize a mistake too late to be able to undo it if you choose 150 history states. And then click OK. And that's it. And next up, we're going to discuss the workflow steps that we should apply to our portraits. There is kind of an order of operations to work in what I think is the most efficient manner possible to both keep our files organized and logical, but also to keep them from being much larger than they have to be. So that's something that we'll go over throughout the entire course. But up front, I want to kind of break it down for you and sort of explain the steps in detail. And that way, when we're going through each of the images, it'll make a little bit more sense, kind of the progression of how we do things. So stick around for that.